This is the BBC's position. 1. Man-made climate change exists. That's it. So it starts off with that statement. If the science proves it, we should report it. The BBC accepts that the best science on this issue is the IPCC's position set out above. But of course the IPCC say there's no influence, as we know, in man-made climate change with floods, with rising sea levels, with sea acidity, with droughts and so on. I have done many videos on that. But no, they just ignore all that, so they go against their own rule here. They are not following the science of the IPCC. And then the really critical thing is the next bit. Be aware of false balance. As climate change is accepted as happening, you do not need a denier to balance the debate. Just think about what they've just written there. The BBC just accept the science is over. That's it. It's done. They are the experts on it. In real life, they're an expert on absolutely nothing, but it's accepted. There's no need to go any further. And they use the word denier. So anyone who opposes their stance, their authoritative stance on it, is a denier. You know, what an incredibly biased position to be in. It goes right against their charter. And then continuing, it goes on to say, although there are those who disagree with the IPCC's position, very few of them now go so far as to deny that climate change is happening. And what they mean intrinsically by that is, of course, man-made. I mean, climate change has always happened, as we all know. To achieve impartiality, you do not need to include outright deniers of climate change in the BBC coverage. In the same way, you would not have someone denying that Manchester United won 2-0 last Saturday. The referee has spoken. However, the BBC does not exclude any shade of opinion from its output, and with this appropriate challenge from a knowledgeable interviewer, there may be on occasion to hear from a denier. Oh well, we're allowed in occasionally to go against this totally biased stance that the BBC take. But we'll continue. There are occasions where contrarians and sceptics should be included with climate change and sustainability debates. These may include, for instance, debating the speed and intensity of what will happen in the future. So there, of course, you're not debating the underlying thing, just how fast it happens, or what policies government should adopt. Again, accepting the issue, but how we're going to cope with it. Again, journalists need to be aware of the guest's viewpoint and how to challenge it effectively. As with all topics, we must make it clear to the audience which organisations the speaker represents, potentially how that group is funded, and whether they are speaking with authors from a scientific perspective. In short, making their affiliations and previously expressed opinions clear. Well, they don't do that on the alarmism side, so you can understand from this, and this is a BBC document, you can understand the approach from this terribly corrupt organisation that really should be done away with. So that is the approach, and what you're going to hear now in this video is you're going to hear first an interview, a BBC interviewer interviewing a climate scientist, and I'll be dissecting that as I go through. But then you're going to hear one of the subscribers to this channel, a chap called David, beginning to challenge that, and that's when it really comes to fore, this BBC approach. Now, I've actually got a lot of time for this interviewer, and I think he does a good job of interviewing, but he's not knowledgeable on the subject, because you don't need the knowledge on the pro side, you only need it against. And therefore, what this video shows is a total bias to the BBC. And you'll understand it maybe when you see it. So it's in two parts. First, the interview with the climate scientist. Welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to take the BBC apart. It's as simple as that. And what happened was a subscriber to my channel contacted me just yesterday, actually, sending me some recordings of an interview that he had, a phone-in thing on BBC Radio London. And I was able to obtain the podcast of it. And it starts off with a professor from London University, a climate professor, making statements that are totally absurd. And then it follows with this subscriber phoning in. And I was so angry with the response to him. And I was so angry with listening to the rubbish on this that I decided straight away to drop what I was doing. What was I doing? Well, actually, I'm doing a major documentary, not the normal stuff, like a full broadcast quality documentary to do with the 2030 targets, because by 2030 it's meat, it's dairy, its farms will not be as we know them. But it isn't just that, it's housing, it's everything, and everything's closing in together. And so the documentary is about this closing in together of the mad world we're in with net zero and what it really means to you. So I've had to drop that for a while, and that can take a month or two to actually be produced. So I've dropped it to do this video. Why? Because I was so angry at listening to this. So here we are. Now, this is a podcast from Radio London, as I said, and the presenter here is actually quite a decent chap. I quite like him and the way he thinks. The problem is he's just ignorant about science. And don't forget, the BBC have a rule. I've published it before. The memo to everyone on the BBC says you can do climate alarmism as much as you like. You don't need to counter it. But if someone comes on and does counter it, you must immediately reference an authority to counter them. So in other words, the whole of BBC intentionally, actually, as a matter of policy, have decided what the science is, even though they haven't a clue, right? And they're giving you propaganda. But that's all the BBC is today. So what I'm going to do now is play the professor that was on this first, and then the caller, who's one of our subscribers called Dave. I'm going to play him, and I'm going to dissect it as we go, because honestly, I have never heard such madness in my life as on this call. And I believe, as I said, the presenter was swallowing it hook, line and sinker. And so I want to also give a lesson to him on what science is. Well, here we go. Let's start the podcast.
BBC Radio London's mid-morning programme. My name is Eddie, taking you right through till 2 p.m. Now, we have a little bit of freedom on this show to indulge some of what the team talk about. Just a little bit, not very much. But what is net zero? Many people have talked about achieving net zero by 2050. I think Mayor of London talks about achieving it by 2030. But do you know what it is? What is it? What does it mean? How will you play a part in it? Will it be something that comes from the top down? Will it be something that us individuals have to do? How will it change my life? What will it mean? And what will it mean when the president of the free world, or president-elect of the free world, seems not to recognise that anything to do with the environment means anything at all? Well, I can't answer any of those questions, as you probably know, but somebody who will have a go at it is Professor Mark Maslin. I hope it's Maslin, as Maislin. I hope it's Maslin. Professor of Climatology at the University College London. Professor, I am so sorry, I probably should have checked. How do I pronounce your surname?
Oh, no, it's just Maslin, but at home I usually answer to or you, so anything works with me.
Oh, that's certainly a lot nicer than they call me, but it's behind my back, so I don't care. I don't care. Thanks for doing this for me. It is. I live in a world where people say things. Brexit means Brexit, and we get all these kind of sound bites, and I honestly sit here and I go, what does it actually mean? And because nobody asks, I think, well, I feel stupid because everybody clearly knows. What does net zero mean?
Okay, so net zero is a wonderful term that was developed from the Paris Agreement in 2015. And it's a very simple concept, which is all of us, individuals, companies, countries, have to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases to zero.
Well, it's quite right there. That is what they're trying to do. And the word to note here is that we have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to zero. In this mad world, it's plant food. We have to reduce our emissions of plant food to zero, would be another way of putting it. More about that later. But that is the madness of all this. And of course, that is not what is happening. Just look at China and the UK CO2 emissions here. This is one of the examples where you must not believe the evidence of your eyes and ears, a la 1984, because China have been building coal plants, as we all know, maybe one or two a week now for years, and will continue to do so. They can do so under the Paris Agreement until 2030. And when they have even got to 2030, just keeping all those new power stations going will make sure they continue to pump huge amounts of CO2 in the air. The whole thing is a fallacy, and you're meant to believe in it.
However, we're very practical and sensible and know that there are some emissions from aviation, concrete manufacturing, and agriculture that we're not going to be able to get rid of. So, to actually balance that out, we say, well, hang on, we can actually take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and suck it out into new forests, into rewilding wetlands and things like that. And so the net comes in that we're reducing sharply, but that residual, that little bit left, we can suck out. And so what happens is there is no net greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. So we get to a net zero. It's a really practical way of approaching it.
It sounds like pie in the sky, though.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, again, we've got Keir Starmer who says that we're going to reduce UK's emissions by 81% by 2035. And actually, it's really positive. By reducing emissions and moving to renewable energy, we clean up our air so our children don't have asthma. We don't have to suffer from all those chest infections so much.
Removing CO2 from the air does not help with chest infections or anything else. It's not in any way toxic. It really isn't. It's plant food. And for him to act as if somehow removing CO2 is going to do that, I'm all for clean air. But don't confuse pollutants with CO2, which is plant food. And he's conflating them there. But that's just the beginning of what he goes on to say. It's bordering on unbelievable, and again he'll be factually wrong.
It has a real health benefit, but at the same time, because we're moving to electricity is so much more efficient. So if we cleaned up the whole of the UK energy and we went to electricity for everything except for aviation and concrete, we would save 40% of our energy, because do you know what? Renewables and electricity are so much more efficient than 19th century technology of burning stuff.
Well, that's rather peculiar, because the 19th century technology is wind power. You know, they own windmills, and we got out of that for very good reasons. So for him to make statements like that is absurd. But let me tell you something now. At the very beginning of me, I'm afraid, taking this nonsense he's spouting apart. The total energy requirements in the UK, that's everything we use in energy, the energy, not just the grid. Wind and solar added together are 4.8%. Where do I get that figure from? From Ed Miliband's own department, the BEIS, the own department. So the government figures say it's 4.8% today. But he's all for changing everything over without any understanding of the many trillions of costs. I mean, the average home can't even take the power without digging up every single cable in Britain practically, putting every single new substation in, and so on. This is just make-believe nonsense. I mean, we haven't got the money. Even if we spent it on nothing else but this, we haven't got the money to do what he's talking about. So this is a man whose feet have left the ground completely with this, but we'll carry on.
Did you see the stuff that happened around ULEZ? Did you see the stuff that happened around LTNs? Have you seen the way that the people of London have resisted the idea? So this is a top-down thing then?
No, I think it's a communication problem, because I think in all of those cases, we were talking about changing the environment for the better to save lives. And of course, there is a small minority that always lose out. And what we have to do is build policies that don't create losers. It makes sure that everybody is taken on and everybody actually is successful through it. And so sometimes it's about communication, and sometimes it's about politics. Certain politics really just wants to shove it to the man and go, do you know what? Guess what? Anything you're telling me must be bad. It's like, no, we're trying to help you and make your kids healthier. So I think there is that.
Yeah, I understand why you would say that, and to a certain extent, I see that online. But for the purpose of the conversation, I'm not. It is not permissible in the court of Eddie Nestor, and I tell you for why. Because it sounds very much like an academic saying everybody else is stupid, and I don't like that.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm actually saying that we've got it wrong where we're not communicating clearly enough to say what are all the benefits. But also,
But it's not your job, is it? This is the disconnect, and I'm so glad. I hope I have it on here because I think let me just because we don't know each other. I have it on here because I think it's important. I have it on here
yeah,
because I have two small children. I have it on here because I can see the president-elect of the free world doesn't believe it, and I have it on here because people talk about it as though they expect everybody to know about it, and I don't think they do. And so I'm engaging in a debate with you, and I mean no offense by it. Is that all right?
I don't take any offense, Eddie. I mean, I have been working with people, some hardened climate skeptics for 20 odd years. And no,
Right, right.
if
So
there is a problem communicating, then that's on my side as much as yours. So
well, I don't
again,
know. I don't know. It's because it's the your side. With all due respect, I'm going to give you what I think. Your side is the science of it. You're the science of it, the benefits of it. It is the politician's job to sell what you say.
No, no, not quite right there. The science is not settled by any means. In fact, the science is completely opposite to what's being told to you. And as we go through this, I'll be exposing it. But that is not true. It's as if the science is settled. It isn't, Eddie. The science is not settled by a mile. You've got Nobel Prize winners coming out in physics saying it's rubbish, all this alarmism. Yeah, so it isn't true, Eddie. And therefore you cannot have politicians just promoting it. The problem is in our parliament and our leaders and people like Ed Miliband haven't a clue about technical subjects. They have not a clue about all the implications or about the science and so on. That's a huge problem in our society.
sometimes, but the problem is that politicians are there sometimes just to sell themselves. You and I know that.
I
But I'll
could
give you,
I
I'll give you
couldn't
some
possibly
past,
comment.
Eddie, let me give you some past examples. Okay. We actually banned lead in petrol because, of course, it's a neurotoxin. It actually causes mental health problems and causes violence in young people. So we banned it. We brought in safety belts. We even brought in sort of the congestion zone charge in London, which
You are the one who told me to buy a diesel car. Don't get me
yeah.
frustrated here.
Well, guess what? That wasn't us. That was
Oh, right, okay. That's your cousin, was it?
corporation cheating. Come on, we can't.
Well, how
we
do I
can't
know?
do it for you.
Yeah, but it all comes out. The messaging all comes out via the same source. So how do but how do we know who to believe? Now, look, let's just go back to the straight road, and then we'll go off onto the wonky roads in a little while.
Yeah.
Right? The straight road says, in opposition, the Labour Party dictated or donated or said that £29 billion would be used towards it. As soon as they got close to government, they pulled that back straight away. It was 2025, 2030, 2035. We had a former Prime Minister, former two-time Mayor of London saying we are 5 minutes to midnight, and yet nothing has been done. So where is the impediment? What's breaking this up? Why aren't we moving smoothly towards something scientifically you believe that everybody should understand anyway?
But we are. So I'll give you an example. In year 2000, we had just 2% of renewable energy in our energy mix. We're now up to, in electricity, 50%.
He really is exaggerating a bit there, but never mind. Wind and solar added together come to 35.1% of the power grid. You've got wind there at just 30.4%. And solar, as we know, is only available for part of the day, hardly available at all in the winter. Hydro, which is 1.4%, is a great source of power. Love it, but it's limited because of our topography. We're not Norway. And so all renewables, including biomass, which is the biggest con there's ever been, where we subsidise Drax alone by £700 or £800 million every year, that's at 4.7%. And all we're doing there is burning wood imported from way, way away in America and Canada and sometimes Russia to burn instead of coal just 2 miles away. It makes no sense at all, and actually, it actually produces more CO2. In fact, the biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe is our Drax power station. So in terms of where we've made there, what progress there, all of that's only possible because we've got gas to back it up. All of that. Now, when you actually allow for, that's only for the power grid, so now allow for our total energy, the power grid is 20% of that, so we have to decrease these figures fivefold to get it as a percentage of our total energy. So, as part of our total energy mix, all the renewables, instead of 43.1%, become 8.62%. So over 90% of our energy today, in fact over 91%, is still coming from other sources, not renewables. And yet our Prime Minister, because he's stupid, declares that by 2035, 81% will be renewables. Okay, so what does wind become? Well, wind becomes 6.08%. So all the wind farms and everything today, right up to date, just 6% of our total energy, and only there because it's supported by gas. Biofuels are 1.32%. Solar is 0.94%. Less than 1% of our energy comes from solar, and hydro, which is great stuff, as I've said, 0.28%. So when you actually look at the part we've done in total mix, what we're after, that's what we're looking at. And this man is really away in the clouds. I think he seems to be a very nice chap, but he's literally away in the clouds. Don't ever ask him to design a bridge or do any engineering work where safety is concerned.
And the previous government actually cracked it because what they did was they talked to industry. So, for example, offshore wind has done incredibly well because the government of the day sat down with industry and said, what do you need? And they said, we need a guaranteed price so I can go to the bank and ask for a £20 million loan so I can build the wind turbines for you. And they went, okay. And that worked.
I love the total dream world nature of what's just been stated there. Yes, if it was, let me just explain, if it was renewables were cheaper, the private industry would be there like a shot providing cheap energy. No problem, no need for guarantees, no need for subsidies. But in actual fact, that is not the case. In actual fact, the guarantee we give, the contracts for the difference, what we say is, we're going to give you a price for every megawatt of energy, not that you produce. No, no, no. We're going to give you the price for every megawatt you could produce, even if we don't need it. So when we don't need it, like overnight and it's very windy, we're going to pay you anyway. Well, that is ridiculous. And that problem is going to become huge now as we're increasing the wind. But in addition to that, we're going to pay you when we haven't got the network to take the energy. And there's a Scottish wind farm, 51% of the time is being paid not to give us energy. In other words, it gets more money from not giving us energy than it does from actually giving us energy. That one is because of network constraints. It doesn't matter. This is economic madness. So straight away on that farm, you've doubled the cost immediately. Yes, no wonder you have to give the guarantee. It's not sensible. And what he's just stated there is so simple and Wonderland. It is fairies in Wonderland or Alice in Wonderland.
So sometimes it's not about government just throwing money at stuff. Sometimes it's sitting down with business and going, okay, how do we get you to move forward? How do we actually clean up our atmosphere? And you say that people don't get this. Something like 80% of Brits really want something to happen on climate change.
Yeah,
because
as long as it doesn't inconvenience them.
Well, again, it's about trying to make things easier. So, for example, if we had incredible networks of charging points for electric cars, we wouldn't worry about it. So it's about building the infrastructure and people will come.
Just think what he just said there, that we can have charging points everywhere. You have to have all the power lines all the way through the system for this. You would have to rip up every drive in lots of houses to get the charging points into the home. If they're in the street, you have to have the local substations upgraded everywhere, the entire system rebuilding. And it's dead simple in his world because he hasn't got a clue about the economics of this, because money doesn't matter.
We've been
It's
saying that. We've been saying that for a while now, haven't we? And then I get women phoning me up and going, the charging points are in really dark places, and I don't feel safe going there. And you think, well, you want people to buy it, but you do have to have the infrastructure before you do that. Can I take it to my house and say I had a look at this, and I barely believed it when I saw it, that England have some of the worst numbers in relation to insulated homes in the whole of Europe. Wouldn't that play a part?
Oh, absolutely. And government after government has had these sort of schemes that try to incentivize, to partly pay for insulation. No. And I have a brilliant story. So many years ago, a chief science advisor to the UK government got so frustrated with protesters running onto Heathrow, trying to disrupt airlines. And he said, look, if they could just run into everybody's house and go, insulate, insulate, please insulate, we could save more in a month than aviation in the UK does in a whole year. And again, it's trying to get people to be incentivized. We have some of the worst housing stock in the whole of Europe. And this is one of my bugbears because it's bad for people's health. We have damp houses, we have drafty houses. Again, we need a
But wouldn't you
whole.
start there? And what I'm saying is, if we're doing all this big picture stuff, wouldn't you
Yeah.
start with incentives to get people, while you're taking a winter fuel allowance, while we, have energy prices increasing? Wouldn't you just start there in the fundamental? We will help everybody to insulate their home so that the heat that you generate in your home stays in your home. Wouldn't that be a brilliant start?
Yes, it would be wonderful. Well, just let me explain. It's not that simple. I live in a house that's just over 100 years old. It's built of brick. It's a brick house. I have put in about 2 feet of insulation in the attic, and I have double glazed and removed every window and every door and double glazed the whole lot. I have done all I can to insulate the house, yet I can't get a good energy rating on the house because I haven't got the solar panels. And unless I put a heat pump in, which I can't do because I would have to increase the number of radiators, I'd have to more than double them. It's 2.2 times the amount you've already got. So if you've got 10 radiators now, you'd need 22 to get the same heat output because the water's only at 40 C. And then you'd be swapping over your oil or your gas for that. Yes, that's how the swap would be. Heat pumps are a real nuisance in so many applications, and in my case, they're not even possible. I'm also told by the person who energy rated the house that if I insulated the walls, then I could go up. Maybe that would also be a good point. The trouble is, if I insulated the walls in here, Greedy wouldn't do it either. If I insulate the walls, I get a lot of dampness problems with it. So it isn't as simple as he's saying. So what we're describing here, I'm all for great insulation in homes, but what he's describing here is Alice in Wonderland again. And all these costs, by the way, of helping people insulate their homes for nothing, etc., is all adding to your energy prices. So, that no one argues with the insulation of homes, but you have to be practical about it, and that's my point.
So I think insulating people's houses, putting solar panels on everybody's houses,
Yes.
making sure they all have batteries to store that energy.
Oh yeah, solar power. Well, in the winter, when we have the highest demand for energy, solar power is next to nothing. Next to nothing. And if in Britain, if you look at the panel rating of solar panel and multiply it out for the number of hours of the year, and you take between 9.5% and 11%, depending how north you are, you'll get an idea of how much output you get. And the best only gives 11%, and that's for the professional ones, the ones that just the best angle in the fields, as it were. So solar power is really not a sensible thing to do. On top of that, there was a research paper pointing out that anywhere north of Morocco, it actually costs more in the footprint in CO2 is bigger to make and fit, transport and fit, than you actually save out of it. So in actual fact, and then never mind all the pollution aspects of that, because he's going on about pollution there. Well, the runoff from the solar panels ain't good. So this idea, and by the way, a battery and a solar panel without a battery really doesn't make much sense for most people. It's almost because when the power comes in the middle of the days when you least need it and it's lost, or you get a fraction maybe putting it back into the grid. But a battery for a 10 kilowatt battery, what, 10, 12,000 pounds just for that? So you're looking at maybe 15,000. Oh yeah, We can all come with these ideas. Let's give £15,000 to every house in Britain, And we tried all this nonsense with money, and the COVID thing giving huge sums of money away, and it's why we're in trouble today. So this again is pie in the sky economics. It's just a child doing wishful thinking.
Because the other interesting thing is if we have everybody that can, and some houses and some flats aren't suitable, with solar panels, and solar panels are so brilliant now that they work in our climate. Trust me.
Do they? I got offered them 15 years ago, and I went, I'm not going to be in 50. And now I think a mate of mine is in Jamaica. She's put them on hers. I mean, granted, it is slightly more sunny. And after the hurricane, she was providing electricity to the whole street. Is it still worth it?
So, Eddie, think about your phone 15 years ago. Okay, technology improves markedly. The price of solar panels has crashed because it is so cheap to produce. So now we can have Northern Hemisphere winter actual solar panels that work and generate a lot of electricity. So again, the technology has accelerated because the demand is so high. But again, what we need to do is how do we incentivize? Because for me, it shouldn't be the individual. It shouldn't be the middle class that goes, oh, no, darling, I'm going to put a solar panel on because I've got some spare cash. Somehow we have to actually make it that we have a program with government that allows every household, okay, to have solar panels, heat exchangers, and again, sort of proper insulation. And we need to have that rolled out across the whole country. Give you a shocking stat. If we want the whole of our housing to move to heat exchangers by 2050, we have to fit 3,000 a day starting yesterday.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because I haven't even started the fact that I picked up my newspaper today and they're telling me about the smog over, I don't know if you've seen it, over Delhi. So what's the point in us doing what we're doing if nobody else on all those emerging markets in India, which isn't going to be the new world power, we know it, China, America, I dare say Brazil, if they're not doing it, what's little us doing it what kind of difference is that going to make?
So I call this the what about China climate denier approach. So the really interesting thing about China is they've said that they will peak their emissions by 2030.
Oh, it's China argument. Well, actually, these are the facts. In the Paris Accord about 2015, China agreed that after 2030 it would limit. But until then, it could do what it liked. Same for India and others. So China's been building coal power stations as if there's no tomorrow, 2 a week, etc. Yeah? So we are now burning in the world today more fossil fuel, more coal, more oil, more gas than ever before in our history. Fact. And when it gets to 2030, China has now built them all. Well, they're going to keep them going, aren't they? So they've got another 5 years of building, and then they keep all this cheap energy going while we struggle and do away with their industries, like we're doing away with the motor car industry at the moment. The steel building industry, well, that's gone, so let's do the motor cars as well. Instead, we'll bring them all from China or somewhere, shall we? Because we're losing jobs hand over fist on all this. So this idea is just incredulous, what he's saying. Absolutely incredulous.
Now, I don't have the data, but we're convinced that they'll probably do it next year, 4 years early. Because when China says they're going to do something, they do it, and they do it much earlier. So China has developed, it's now got all the industry, and they're now maturing as an economy, and they are now working out that they need to lead in climate change. And of course, when they have deserts to the north of them, they have cyclones to the south of them, and they have the Himalayas melting to the west of them, then they really
can see
it by climate change.
Yeah.
Okay, for this shot, by the way, it's done on a different day, different clothes, so don't bother with continuity. So what he said was, China, this great trust he's got in China, deserts to the north, he said, well, the facts are deserts have been shrinking. Reason? The CO2 extra plant food means that the stomata, the little holes in the plants, need less moisture, and therefore they need less moisture, they'll encroach on deserts. That's exactly what's happening. As regards cyclones to the south, well, hurricanes and cyclones, all the tropical storms, no evidence whatsoever, according to the IPCC scientists, no evidence whatsoever of mankind's influence on that, and a slight decline. And we'll finish off with glaciers Glaciers to the west, he said. Glaciers again, IPCC report, table 12. See it in the, so you can see the whole thing. In fact, I did a 3-minute video on it, and you'll see it there below in the information on this video. So none of those are true. He's just invented them all. Right, and if you think China is actually going to reduce CO2 emissions, you're balmy. Just look at this graph. This is per capita. We are way below China on per capita CO2 emissions. In fact, we're below the entire world average on CO2 emissions. So China is just ploughing ahead, and China's got a lot more people than us and is putting out these enormous quantities of CO2 which are continually rising. You are continually asked not to believe the evidence of your own eyes for this to work. This is so Orwellian, it's beyond belief. And this man has swallowed the Kool-Aid hook, line and sinker.
There can see it. And here we are, a tiny island, not part of EU anymore, with a president who doesn't believe in it. Looks like he's going to have another pop at NATO. I mean, when he was elected, and I'm not asking for a political view, you stay in your subject, right? You stay in your safe subject. When you heard he was elected, what did that mean from your perspective for climate change, for environmental health? What did that mean?
So there are two sides to this. There's the huge negative one, which is he will probably take USA out of the Paris Agreement. He'll also start to unpick all the environmental regulations in the US, which actually a lot of dear friends of mine.
That will be fracking difficult.
Oh, thank you. I love the joke. And also, he will allow other countries to go, well, hang on. If the US isn't doing it, we're going to slow things down. We're just going to take our time about it. However, there's some positives. The global economy is moving to renewables in a huge way.
This man has drunk some serious Kool-Aid. We are now burning, as a matter of fact, the graph's there, more oil than ever before, more coal than ever before, and more gas than ever before in human history. Fact. There's the graph. You can look it up yourself. It's on World in Data, and it's from the proper sources. Where he gets his dream world from, I do not know, but he is totally detached from reality. Totally.
And in the USA, I can tell you that the amount of coal that was produced and used during his first term of office dropped dramatically. It's now reduced even more under Biden. And so the underlying economics will drive America towards renewables and low carbon solutions because it's a lot cheaper.
It's a lot cheaper. You're not meant to believe the evidence of your own eyes and ears. If it was a lot cheaper, it wouldn't need any of the subsidies that are being given to it. Let's take biomass. The one Drax plant, around about £700-800 million a year just to the one plant in subsidies. No, it's not a lot cheaper. It's far, far more expensive because it has to be built right alongside the gas system. We even need now to their plans to double the amount of gas stations because that's the only viable backup. There is no other backup. It's an additional system on top of what we've got. It's incredibly expensive. To say it's a lot cheaper just goes in the face of every fact that's out there.
It's just going to be slower. And I think that's really problematic. But again, you have to remember that just represents the government. At the federal level and also at the mayor level, huge support. So the last time he poured out, the mayors of many American cities and lots of big corporations turned up at the COP meeting and said, the USA is still here.
It amazes me how people like him can think that COPs make any difference. Plotting all the COP meetings and all the other meetings on the CO2 growth graph, it makes no difference at all. These people are just head in the clouds and they have power. It's really frustrating to listen to this nonsense.
Okay, forget the president, but we're still here. We're still doing things on the ground. So there's always hope, and there's always good people doing good stuff.
But those states, certainly in education, are going to get a lot more power because he thinks that's the way it is. It could be regarded as 50 countries. We're not quite like that, even though people like me here in London think that we are the engine that drives the UK economy. Where does Mir Khan fit in all of that? Yesterday, I know we didn't do it as a subject, but I know there were a lot of people thinking that he had kind of pulled back on his climate agenda. Where do you think, as somebody at University College London, our mayor fits into all of this?
So again, I think that mayors are really important because cities are where you can make big changes with lots of people very quickly. And again, what I love was it was a previous a mayor of London that set up the C40, which now has 96 cities. And those are mayors all around the world that come together and they actually sit down and go, what's best practice? Oh, look, Bogota has got electric buses. How can we use that? How has air pollution been cleaned up in the other cities? And so I think that's really important. And having a city as powerful and as inspirational as London, if we can clean up our act, if we can move to a net zero without actually affecting our economy and actually boosting it, then that's going to be great to sell around the world.
This is so pie in the sky. This wonderful world of academics who live off the system. They don't have to create the wealth. They live off the wealth that others create. And there's nothing wrong in particular in that. I support universities. But these people, and they've just multiplied in quantities way past normality, way past what we need. But they don't live in the real world where the money matters. There is no chance of the economy booming with net zero. It's going to do, and it is doing, the exact opposite. I mean, even whilst making this video, there's been an energy price rise on the 1st of October, and we've just faced another one as I'm making this video just yesterday. So if it was getting cheaper all the time, as we're being told, why isn't it getting cheaper? And the reason is, of course, we're having to pay huge subsidies in this, and they don't count all the subsidies into it. So you're paying some of it via your income tax and your other taxes and your VAT, and you're paying some of it on your energy bills. The total bill is an enormous burden on our economy, and it is totally pie in the skies to suggest anything else.
Lars, and I left this bit to last because I really like the fact that you've been incredibly upbeat about this. But what happens if we don't?
Okay, so this is the interesting thing is over the last 12 months, we have just pushed through the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was the aspirational target for the COP meeting in Paris 10 years ago.
These people treat this 1.5 degree increase since 1850 as some sort of bad thing. In actual fact, it started warming 150 years before 1850. It started warming in the 1600s. And that must have been natural. It wasn't us doing the Industrial Revolution. And they want us to, stay back in that? I really fascinates me as if this has been negative. The truth is, it's been wholly positive. In history, every warm period has been the time when civilization progressed. They're treating it as some bad thing. So if you want to go back to the Thames frozen over, you want to go back to the mass starvation and famines of the 16, 17, 1800s, then fine. But these people would have you back there, it seems.
Now, of course, the target was 2 degrees with an aspiration of 1.5. And the thing I will say is that going through a target isn't catastrophic, but every 10th of a degree that we stop warming will mean less extreme weather events.
Well, he obviously doesn't agree with the IPCC then. I mean, they say there's no detection of any of man's influence in droughts, in floods, in hurricanes, etc. Yeah, so in actual fact, and it's table 12, it's, I think, page 856 in AR6. And, I've featured it many times in videos. I won't repeat it all here. I'll put the reference if anyone wants to see it to that chapter in the description below this. But everything from rising sea levels, no, they say they can't detect any of man's influence. Agricultural droughts, hydrological droughts, no, none of the droughts. Floods, hurricanes, no, none of those. So this is even swallowed the politics. It's got nothing to do with science, this. Because if you're going to follow the science, follow the scientists who declared they can't find any signal in it, and that's the IPCC.
Less sea level rise and less increase of human misery around the world. And so for me, the fight is always worth it. Even if we get to 2 degrees, I want to stop 2.1 degrees. If we get to 2.1 degrees, I'll be fighting to stop to 2.2
Or
degrees.
what?
What do you mean, or what?
No, I mean, there has to be a certain amount of jeopardy, which I've avoided. If we don't do it, then what?
So I would have to say, I'm going to give you a real positive, because everybody sort of says the international COP meetings are useless. But because of that leadership, which is of course too slow, we have already avoided the 4, 5, 6 degree scenarios that I was deeply worried about 10, 15 years ago. So the catastrophic end of the planet has gone.
What you just said there is amazing. The catastrophic end of the planet's gone. We've already avoided that. By doing what? Because we haven't controlled the growth of CO2. We haven't done that at all. I mean, the graphs on this are totally clear. We've made no difference at all to it. And where does this scientific evidence come from that we'd have ended the planet had we not done what we've done so far? I've heard of academics detached from reality, but that really takes the cake.
Now, we're still looking at 3 degrees warming, which would be absolutely horrendous for many countries around the world. But again, we're humans. So we've stopped the 6 degrees. We're now at 3 degrees. Now, can we actually bring the economy back to making sure it's only 2 degrees or maybe just before 2 degrees? So there's always stuff to actually fight for. And the thing is frustrating is that when I told you all the things we can do to clean up air pollution, we can have really cheap electricity from renewables, all these things you would do anyway, even if it wasn't actually saving the planet as well. And I think that's the frustration that scientists get, which is all the solutions that we have are so supportive and positive about sort of like fairness, equity. It's cheaper. Let's just go for that. It's cheaper. And that's the frustration. It's like, why would you want to keep a dirty fossil fuel world when you can have this beautiful sort of like 21st century technology, electric dominated world?
Well, if it means that I have to do the one thing that is the most difficult word in the English language, it scares people. I think any kind of change does that. And the way you presented it is incredibly upbeat and fantastic. But for lots of people, it represents a change to their normality and the way they live their lives. I really appreciate you coming on to do that today. And I'm hoping that sorry?
Eddie, but people hate change, but they're really good at it. Think about when you upgrade your phone. You hate it. And then suddenly within half an hour, oh yeah, it works. You know,
change is cycle lanes. Change is immigrants. Change is not being able to smoke in the car. Initially, it's absolutely terrifying. But in the end, I think quite a lot of these things you look at and go, how did we ever do that? You got me looking at C40 now. If I can keep your number, you'll definitely be back on the show. Thank you, Professor, so much. This is BBC Radio London. Here's the news.
Well, that's the interview with the professor, which I found amazing. I really did. And we're going to move on now to a short section, but it's a section where a chap called David, who was one of the subscribers to my channel, phoned up. And it really does bring home some lessons, this part. Really, this is the most important part because, okay, we dealt with the academic madness there, but let's deal with the reality of what happens when you challenge it and you phone up BBC and challenge it. Now, so far, I can tell you this. I give 10 out of 10 to this presenter. He asks very sensible questions, but he doesn't know enough to resist the absolute nonsense he's being given. So let's see what happens now when someone does phone up to try to challenge it. But there's one more thing before that. In the news section that just comes up, there's an announcement of one of those things we're supposed to forget, which is after the 1st of October energy price increase, there's now going to be another one. Another one's just happened as well. Unbelievable. I'll play that, then we'll move on to David calling in.
Higher energy bills helped push the rate of inflation up sharply last month, back above the Bank of England's target of 2%. In the year to October, the cost of living went up by 2.3%, compared to 1.7% in the year to September. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he knows there's more to do to help people who are still struggling with the cost of living.
Gone are the days when inflation was at 10, 11%, driving family bills through the roof. Inflation is stable, it's around target, and the key driver of the inflation statistics today is that expected increase in the energy price cap set by the regulator, Ofgem.
Net zero. David, how are you, David? Long time no speak. Are we speaking about cars, engines? This is a subject. I think you sit there and you wait for me to do a subject like this. You go, oh, I'm going to tell him the truth. The Muppet doesn't know anything. Anyway, how are you? Is it a good day for you, David, before we get started?
Thanks, I'm fine, Eddie. Thank you very much. And I prefer talking about cars, but I can talk about net zero.
Right, but net zero, you heard? I thought he was really good. I thought he put the argument across. It's a win-win. It's better for you, healthier for you, in the end, cheaper for you. What on earth was there to disagree with, David?
Yeah. Well, he's only looking at like the last year. He said he mentioned the last 12 months about reducing the temperature. But with climate, you've got to look at hundreds of thousands of years. And if you go back further, it's up and down all the time. The climate.
We weren't driving cars hundreds of thousands of years ago.
That is totally correct. We weren't driving cars, but the CO2 levels are much higher, and so are temperatures much higher.
You know, I looked at it, and if you look at, I don't know, the existence of humanity like a clock, we've been here for about 10 minutes. You know that, right? And we cause more damage than anything else.
Well, go back and look further back into the statistics. And I also want to say...
No, don't do that. Deal with what he said. What is wrong with attempting to insulate homes? What is wrong with trying to provide cleaner air so that children don't die, people don't get Alzheimer? What is wrong with what he said? Deal with what he said.
Yeah. Regarding insulating homes, that probably is a good idea. But I would like to talk about what he did say, and that is about solar and about battery storage.
Yes.
Okay. Wind turbines, I'm sorry.
Well, hold on a minute. You know, you're jumping about a bit, Dave. You know I love you, but we're going to find one thing and we're going to stick to that. He talked about solar. I said to him I got offered it 15 years ago, and Muppet me thought it was too complicated. He talked about it. What about it did you not like? What about it would you like to take issue with?
Because solar, it becomes less efficient over time, and they leak cadmium and they leak lead into the soil, and they're also not as efficient as the companies say, because they base their figures on it being sunny 24/7. In reality,
but he didn't. He addressed that. He said when you got offered it 15 years ago, Eddie, then maybe X. But what we've done, and I think he gave the example there of my mobile phone or your mobile phone, and he talked about how. Even in the climate that we have, really weird on a day like today, one of the coldest days of the year to be talking about solar. But he said that it would work even now. I mean, he's a professor. How would you deny what he says?
Again, it's a massive subject, but I can only go by the research that I've done.
Where are you a professor of climate?
No, of course I'm not.
I don't mean it like that. I mean, you know, look.
And there, at that point, is where this presenter really goes wrong. He doesn't understand how science works. What he's doing there is simply what we call an appeal to authority. Because he's a professor, he's such and such. So if I was going to do that, I would simply produce some Nobel Prize winning professors of physics and say he's totally wrong. That gets you nowhere. I always stop my talks explaining there's no such thing that you can use like consensus or appeals to authority in science. They don't work. And this, I'm afraid, Eddie, has totally wrong. And so does the BBC.
He's a professor. That doesn't mean he's right.
I've been learning my stuff from a scientist who has a YouTube channel.
So you're challenging a professor at UCL on the basis of what you've watched on YouTube?
A scientist. He's a scientist on YouTube. Okay.
You seem to be taking offence at the way that I'm characterising your challenge, but it is what it is. You were ringing up and challenging somebody who works at University College London on the basis of something that you watch on YouTube. Right. What did you see on YouTube that went against what he said?
Wind turbines are also like solar. They also deteriorate over time and they become less efficient. And the bigger they are, the faster they deteriorate. And they also create energy even
When I met my wife, I played her James Brown's Sex Machine. I am older now. I have deteriorated over time. It doesn't mean that I wasn't good in the first place, does it?
But the trouble is we have to pay, even when these wind turbines are not producing energy. Sometimes they don't produce energy, but sometimes they produce too much. And sometimes it's windy, even in the early hours of the morning, when we don't need energy. And there's no way of storing that energy, so we have to pay to give it away.
So, do you accept that we have a problem with climate change?
No, I don't.
Well, then that's. Did your YouTube channel tell you that as well?
Yes.
So why would you believe a YouTube channel and not a professor that works at University College London?
Well, you can see where Eddie's going here. He's trying to ridicule the fact it's coming from a YouTube channel. What actually it's coming from is the evidence that's presented on that YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, and everywhere else. I mean, today 1,000 scientists who just announced, part of Clintel, which I'm a member of, have just announced there is no climate emergency. I could refer to that. But in a sense, again, that's appealing to authority, which you should not do. So the answer to your question, Eddie, is what matters is evidence, not just assertions, because all your scientist did there was assertions. And by the way, I'd be more than happy to debate on air your scientist. There we are. And if you want to know my qualifications, Eddie, I'm a retired chartered environmental engineer, chartered water resource engineer. My work was hydroclimatology. I discovered the effect of sun cycles in rain-fed river flows, things like that. I was responsible for planning water resource for a whole country, and so on, and so on, and so on. And your bloke, by the way, he is basically a background in geology, but it doesn't really matter. His qualifications don't matter, and my qualifications don't matter. All that matters is the evidence you present.
Well, the professor that you had on actually didn't provide much information.
What's the name of your professor?
His name is Paul Burgess, and his channel is called Climate Realism.
Well, I don't want to advertise his channel. I don't want to advertise his channel. Why do you believe him and not the person that I had on?
Because Paul Burgess explains things very, very...
So because you didn't understand what this guy said. Next time I get him on, would you like to debate with him?
If possible, yes.
Yeah, but will you listen? Or are you just going to come on? Because if you're going to come on and do the kind of debates that I see, the intransigence, whatever, then there's no point. I do think it's one of the fascinating things that I have to do on the BBC, which is to give equal time to somebody who sounds to me ill-informed in the same way that I do a professor.
Eddie, I hope you're listening to this, but you are just assuming things here. You're just accepting the professor, really. You just accepted everything he said. You actually asked some very good questions. Very good. I gave you 10 out of 10 for them. But you accepted it because you're ignorant about the subject. And I think you know you're ignorant. I'm ignorant about lots of subjects. Nothing wrong in that. But you were just assuming here that anything coming from this David chap who's rang up is irrelevant. That somehow it's a lower standard. It isn't. And it's actually your side or his side, the professor's side, that's being intransigent here, not David. He wants to discuss some evidence. Now, the only way you can get forward on a radio program is to take one subject. So let's take the energy solutions he's come up with, and let's take the effect. I'd love to challenge him on how he managed to save the world catastrophe so far, the world ending so far. But you can go on forever with these things. So, let's get grips with this, Eddie. I don't think your BBC bosses will be too pleased with what you're doing with that.
You don't believe that driving petrol cars, driving diesel cars, stuff that comes out or used to come out of chimneys, the vast production of animals and the methane they produce, the ruling by a coroner in this court that air quality was a contributory part of the death of a girl. You don't believe in any of that?
Well, Eddie, you're mixing up things there, just like the professor did. We all agree on clean air, but CO2 is not, and he presented it this way. He presented CO2 as a pollutant. That doesn't affect children. As regards one coroner with one person deciding it was quality of air, may well have been. But that is not the general example. What's actually happened in London and many other places, and I'm older than you, Eddie. I'm pretty sure I am. I'm 79. And I remember the smogs. I remember when coal, chimneys and so on, the smoke used to lay heavily all over the place. I remember the pollution that went on, and I fought all my life against it. Don't forget, I was an environmental engineer. So, you are really misrepresenting things here because your professor did. So you're mixing things up. And in doing that, you've really got off on the wrong bat here.
It's not about believing, it's about looking at the facts and looking at the statistics.
You don't believe in any of that. You said you don't believe in climate change.
Oh, dear. Eddie, let's take methane. Let's talk about the radiation transfer model and where methane is active inside that. And let's talk about the effect of methane. Now, Professor William Happer has been professor to scientific advisor to 3 different presidents. And he shows, and I've shown his work, how, and we actually give the evidence of why methane is almost immaterial, for example. So do you want to discuss the radiation transfer model, Eddie? You see, you don't understand the subject and you're misrepresenting it, and the way you're posing these questions is wrong. As regards not believing in climate change, let's just dissect that for a second. It's the opposite way around. For some reason, the alarmists think that everything is a nice steady state. There's hardly any change for tens of thousands or even 100,000 years until man came along. They're the ones not believing in that climate change. We very much believe in it. We very much believe there was a medieval warm period because the evidence is there all around the world for it. We very much believe that the Thames froze over and we had a little ice age. We very much believe in the Roman warm period and earlier warm periods. So we believe in all that. So the funny part of this is it's your professor who doesn't believe in climate change. He thinks it was steady and only man has influenced it.
It's not about believing, it's about looking at statistics. And
it's not about looking at, but the people that you vote for have ruled on it, and they've ruled it. I'm just fascinated with the idea that let's do it then. Next time I get him on, let's see if we can remember to call Dave, and then let Dave debate with him. I'll be fascinating to, if the professor would do it, it would be fascinating to hear. I know there are lots of people who don't believe it, and honestly, if that's what your belief is, then fine, because this is what it is, and people believe it is. But it does look to me that and it might be, over centuries we have ice ages and we have whatever fluctuations in temperature have happened throughout time. I accept that. But sometimes when I look at some of the stuff that's happening, it feels like, ooh, I don't remember that. Ooh, I don't remember that quite so frequently. I don't remember that quite so intently. And if I have to get up out of my bed of a Sunday evening and put the bottles with the bottles and the tins with the tins, or pick up rubbish from the floor, it feels to me like it's a good thing.
So here's my message, Eddie. It's not a question of belief. That's to do with religion. It's a question of understanding. It's a question of looking at evidence and balancing evidence, not belief. Now, as regards you feel things are more frequent, that's because you've been brainwashed by society for the last 30 or 40 years to say that. So, in actual fact, if I told you hurricanes were less, would you be surprised? If I told you droughts were far less, would you be surprised? If I told you the worst droughts were in the 1700s, in recent 1,000 years, would you be surprised? If I told you that forest fires were far less than in the 1930s, worldwide, and if I told you NASA confirmed that worldwide, if I told you that all the authorities say that, but the politicians and the political side distort it. So I can provide you, Eddie, with the evidence that your feeling of more extremes is wrong. I also would point out, by the way, because the Britain's being covered in snow at the moment, and they used to tell us, didn't they, quite recently, children would never see snow again. Eddie, why would you believe in someone who's done every future prediction from polar bears to the coral, the Great Barrier Reef, to rising sea levels? Why would you believe them when every single prediction they've made has been wrong? It's you that's out on a limb here, Eddie, no one else. But I do thank you for being honest. I think that for your questions to the professor and the way you put them, I give you 10 out of 10. For how you responded to David, I give you 2 or 3 out of 10. Because at one point you said, just because he's professor doesn't mean to say he's right. You were right then. That's how you get the 2 or 3 out of 10 rather than 0, actually. So there we are. It was enjoyable. I hope you watch this and I hope you take up the challenge, because a lot of people would listen if there was a proper debate. But I would be very careful, Eddie, because your bosses might really clamp down on you and I don't want to get you into trouble. Thank you for watching.